Okay, I think we can get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining Accessibility is for Everyone. I'm Yvonne Tevis, Chief of Staff in the IT department at the UC Office of the President. And thank you for joining us for the first system-wide celebration of Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So this webinar this morning is sponsored by the UC Electronic Accessibility Committee, affectionately known as the EAC. We have representatives from every UC location, including yours, so you have a representative you can reach out to. Our goal as a committee is to work together to make UC's online environment welcoming and accessible to people with disabilities. One of the ways that we do that is we maintain a resources website that's chock full of accessibility information for you. The website is ucal.us/accessuc, and we've got, the list of the accessibility committee members, so you can find out who's on your campus that you can reach out to for help. We have a link to all the online classes that we're going to talk to you about a little bit later on in this webinar. We have all kinds of tips and guidelines about everything from creating accessible surveys to how to do procurement in an accessible way, creating accessible PDFs, even what we call productivity tools. So how do you use things like Zoom to be accessible? So be sure to check out this website. The theme of today's webinar is that you don't have to be in IT to do something for accessibility. So we're going to start today with an empathy session on why accessibility matters. That's going to be presented by Eric Mays, Dee Capelli, and Lucy Greco. Each of our presenters will be introducing themselves with a little bit more information when they get to their session. So after that, we're going to go into simple steps that you can take for improving accessibility. That's with Amy Chen, Doug Harriman, and Eric Mays. After that, Stephanie Nielsen will give us a quick lesson in how to do captioning. Then Joshua Meltzer will give us an overview of the legal considerations. And then Michael Wegman, Judy Tai, will talk about procurement, meaning think about you buy before you buy and don't get stuck with an inaccessible product. Finally, Jill Walters is going to tell you about all the free online courses that you can take advantage of. Our time today is kind of tight, so we aren't going to take live questions. We ask that instead you put them in Q&A so we can capture them. Our plan is to follow up with you later by email. We're going to have a resources link we'll send to you. We'll answer questions that we can. We'll eventually provide the recording link. And we're also going to include a survey of this webinar. We'd love to get your feedback at the end, and we'll also post that in chat at the end. I'd like to take just a minute to thank Jim Phillips from UC Santa Cruz, who created that evaluation survey and who is working behind the scenes to help us organize this event. I want to note and appreciate that we have a captioner doing live captions for us. We have 2 ASL interpreters doing sign language for us. And I'd also like to thank Angelita Breiter, also of UC Santa Cruz, who helped us put together the ASL interpreters. So with that, let's just get started. And I am now going to turn screen share over for our empathy session.
Thank you, Yvonne. And good morning, everyone. I'm Eric Mays. I'm a UI UX developer at UC Santa Barbara. And I'd like to start off today with a brief talk about empathy and why accessibility matters so much. So the world of digital accessibility, it's filled with the language of compliance, inclusive design, and screen readers. So much so that sometimes we forget what really lies beneath our work in accessibility. Why do we do what we do? And how do we get people on board with creating accessible sites, products, and services? The answer to these questions can be found in one word: empathy. Empathy means being able to perceive and understand how another person may be feeling in a given situation. It reflects a high-level emotional engagement and awareness of another's difficulties. By building empathy, we can learn to act with compassion. The more empathy we have, the better we become at making things accessible. Show me an accessible website, product, or service, and more often than not, you're going to show me a designer or developer who cares deeply about the user experience. And what better way to understand user experience than to hear directly from our users? I'd like to introduce you to Dee Capelli, a student from UC Santa Cruz, and also Lucy Greco, a staff member at UC Berkeley. And now we'd like to hear from Dee Capelli on her perspective.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. My name is Dee Capelli, pronouns she, her. And in 2016, after 8 eye operations, I was left legally blind with only 20% tunnel vision in one eye. I realized even though I didn't know how to make it happen, I had to go back to college and get my degree before my whole world went black. I still want to contribute to society, so I enrolled at Santa Monica College and with the assistance of a service dog, started classes with the intention of transferring to a 4-year college. During that time, I ran into a lot of ignorance about service dogs, physical barriers and constraints the school had integrated into its infrastructure, class materials, software, and the guileless lack of inclusion by students, faculty, and department heads regarding students with disabilities. I'll share a few examples. Pardon me. I had to teach my service dog to tuck his tail when we were on campus to prevent students from grabbing it as they walked or skateboarded past. Award and graduation ceremonies required students walk up a set of black stairs to receive their award, then back down a set of stairs. No contrast marking on the edges of the temporary stairs. Students in wheelchairs were othered by having to roll across the entire length of the floor in front of the platform to receive their certificate at the other side. Not only was the college president unable to shake the student's hand, it was impossible for parents seated in the back of the basketball court to photograph their resilient college student being acknowledged for their outstanding achievement. I explained the inequity to the department head of the disability services and asked that ramps be with contrast marking on the edges be used instead of stairs. I got her assurances, and the next award ceremony had a ramp on one side and unmarked stairs on the other. It was disappointing to see how that request was executed. A professor would not allow me to sit where I could see his lecture slides because he insisted students be seated in alphabetical order so it was easier and faster for him to take attendance. Halfway through a 6-week semester, the head of the science department barred me from attending the class unless I left my service dog tied up outside. The science class was held in a lab, and I was told to fit my dog with a lab kit, which is booties, a lab coat, and goggles, before he would allow me to re-enter the class. By the way, those lab kits cost about $300. First, if I was in a wheelchair, that directive was the equivalent of telling me to leave my wheelchair at the door. Secondly, I needed time to train my dog to wear the kit and still do his job. Being a feisty advocate for equal access, I emailed the head of disability services and discovered the school had no policy about service dogs in their lab. I met with the heads of both science and disability departments to negotiate. The head of the science department was concerned for my dog's well-being. I had no idea how long it would take me to train my dog so I could return to class and not be penalized academically. The result of the meeting was that I would be readmitted to class the next day with my dog, and I agreed to reasonable safety accommodations for him. And the school would establish a service dog policy for classes held in their labs. Also, the disability department would advise any student with a service dog who enrolled in a lab class about the policy requirements well in advance of the start of the lab class semester. That would give the student time to train the dog to work wearing lab equipment. If the student couldn't afford the lab kit, the disability department agreed to pay for the kit, but not the training. I have more examples, but I'll end it here and turn it over to Lucy Greco.
Thank you, Dee. My name is Lucy Greco. I am an accessibility evangelist. I currently work at UC Berkeley. I am the accessibility lead for UC Berkeley, but I also chair the Electronic Accessibility Committee that Yvonne spoke about. So I want to tell you a little bit about my experience as a staff member for UC. First of all, I have worked for UC for 15 years, close to 16 now. And I have gone through many, many phases in my life at Berkeley and at the system in general. I am able to present at different events like this, but also am very active in the UC Tech community. I have presented at the annual UC Tech conference several times, and I've engaged people with the community, teaching them about accessibility and about people with disabilities. But more importantly, I actually show up with my dog and give people the awareness and the understanding that somebody with a disability is around and somebody with a disability is active and participating on a regular basis in all of our technology committees, groups, and activities. There are many things I do at UC that I struggle with. Luckily, I have very supportive staff around me to help. People like Yvonne on this call and people like my own team, the UC Berkeley Web Platform Services team, can help me get through some of these challenges and barriers. Other staff with disabilities may not have those people available. For example, if we have to fill in our annual requirements for training, many of those trainings are difficult and I struggle to take those. So we've worked out different workarounds and accommodations for those particular things. Instead of having to use the online training that is inaccessible, we have provided an alternative way for me to read the contents of that training and understand the important information that's being provided in that training and still get the benefit of why those trainings exist. There are other things that I do sometimes that are actually more effective and quicker because they've been made accessible. Early on, Berkeley came to me when we were trying to decide what we were going to do for our new email service. We had had a serious incident where the email servers that were old and maintained in a different way had crashed and we needed to replace them very quickly. So the Berkeley IT team came to us and said, or came to me specifically and said, you know, these are the 3 things we are considering using. Which of these would be the most accessible for you? We went with the Google Gmail platform because it was one that was already working on accessibility. It turned out the 3 platforms they were looking at were actually all equally inaccessible, but the only one that had a very defined roadmap for accessibility was Gmail. So we worked with them to enhance the accessibility of that tool. The Gmail product also came with the Google Docs product. When we first started our contract with Google, I was not able to use Google Docs whatsoever. Within a year of our contract, because of the work of my team advocating to Google for accessibility on my behalf and other blind people's behalf, Google Docs today is my preferred platform for word processing. Accessibility actually is something that can happen, but it takes a lot of work, and staff members need accessibility as much as students and everyone else in the community. I want you to remember when you're thinking about the next thing you're going to do digitally, how it impacts everyone in the community, and make sure that you're thinking about that in an accessible way. If you're creating a website, please look at our resources, look at all of our tools that we have available to make those websites as accessible as possible. It might be a student like Dee who is using that website. It might be a staff member like myself who is using that website. It could be a parent of a student who is blind and visually impaired. It could be a grandparent who's slowly losing their vision and can't focus on that tiny text that you've chosen. It could be a donor, somebody who graduated 20 years ago and is now has a disability but wants to give back to UC. Every one of these people should be considered. You should be making sure that our UC community is as accessible as possible. Thank you, and I really appreciate all of you signing up for this webinar and caring about accessibility at UC.
Thank you, Lucy, and thank you, Dee, for those engaging perspectives. So we're going to move to the next part of the presentation. I'm going to hand it over to Amy to talk about some simple steps for improving accessibility.
Hi, I'm Amy Chen, and I'm the Web Accessibility Specialist at UC Office of the President.
I'm Doug Harriman. I'm an instructional and web designer with UCOP.
And hello again. I'm Eric Mays, once again, a UI UX developer at UC Santa Barbara.
And what we're going to show today are simple steps that you can start doing right away to help improve accessibility for your content. In the spirit of Global Accessibility Awareness Day and every day, the first step that we wanted to share is that accessibility should be foundational. We encourage you to think about accessibility and incorporate it right from the start to avoid headaches later down the road in case your content gets returned to you if it's too difficult to read or if it's inaccessible. One of the simple things you can do is to use sufficient contrast between your foreground text and graphics and your background colors. So do not have low contrast text that's difficult to read, such as this blue on dark blue, versus a version with better contrast text, such as this white on dark blue. So do use higher contrast text that stands out and is easy to read. There are contrast ratio standards that you need to meet for sufficient contrast, and these are 4.5 to 1 for normal text, or 3 to 1 for large text or graphics and user interface elements. Normal text is any text that's not large text, which is defined as greater than or equal to 14-point bold or greater than 18-point font in size. There are tools that you can use to help with color contrast checking, such as webaim.org's contrast checker webpage or the Wave browser extensions for Chrome and Firefox. There are also desktop applications that you can use, such as the Color Contrast Analyzer from tpgi.com. Here's an example of what the WebAIM Contrast Checker webpage will show you. You can input your foreground color and your background color, and it will give you the contrast ratio. For example, this yellow on blue gives a contrast ratio of 6.31 to 1. The checker will also show you a preview of these foreground and background colors against each other. And it also show both for normal text and large text if it passes the WCAG or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, Level AA, which are the guidelines that UC has adopted. Another simple thing you can do is to not use color as the only means of indicating information. So color is the only means of indicating information. What does that mean? Let's go back to our color contrast guidelines. In this example, the Do guideline for have higher contrast text that stands out and is easy to read is shown on green, versus the Do Not guideline for have low contrast text that's difficult to read is shown on red. The only information or indicator that is indicating which is the Do or the Do Not guideline are the colors red or green, which are colors that are also problematic for people with the most common form of color blindness. So that's not to say that you can't use color to help indicate information, but that color shouldn't be used as the only means of indicating information. So you can use color and something else to indicate information, such as icons, Like in this example, the thumbs down icon is shown with the color red, and the thumbs up icon is shown with the color green. Or you could use shapes such as squares versus circles, or in this example, an X for the incorrect information and a check mark for the correct information. Or you could use text such as the do and do not labels that we've been using throughout this presentation. And now I'm going to pass it off to Doug.
Hello. So our next simple step is to take care in using images. And there are actually a few different points that we intend for this to cover, starting with just foundationally, keep in mind that visually impaired individuals may not be able to see the images that you use, and also that assistive technologies cannot read images, at least not by default. At best, they're just going to tell you the image's file name, and that's rarely enough for you to know what's actually going on within an image. So to account for that, our first bit of do guidance is to assign alt text to your images. Now, if that's a new concept for you, let me quickly explain. Alt text is short for alternative text, and it's text that you assign to an image that will be read by assistive technologies when they encounter the image. So for an example of that, here we have again that WebAIM contrast checker screenshot we shared earlier. And then also a screenshot of the format picture pane within Microsoft PowerPoint with the size and position tab open. That is where within PowerPoint and most Microsoft Office products, you'd find and be able to assign alt text. So within that screenshot, we've got the alt text description for the contrast checker screenshot. I'll read it to you. The WebAIM contrast checker web page includes fields for entering foreground and background colors, a contrast ratio indicator, as well as pass-fail indicators for normal text and large text by both WCAG AA and AAA standards. So as you heard, the alt text description is describing the contrast checker screenshot while also highlighting the key details that we'd want users to take away from encountering that image in that given context. So again, do assign alt text to your images. Our next bit of do guidance specifically for presenters, whether you're presenting live or lecturing or recording, and it's to describe what's in the images that you're showing and also describe why you're showing them. Not something you need to do with every image. You probably don't need to call out your stock photographs or graphics that are just there for decoration. But if you're showing a diagram or a graph or a really purposely chosen image or bit of text, describe its key details and how they relate to the overall point you're trying to make. Because on the flip side, you don't want to rely on audience members' ability to see images or other visuals in order to fully understand the points that you're trying to make, because that's going to leave out that segment of your audience I mentioned earlier. So for example, don't just throw up a graph and say something like, oh, as you can see, this graph proves my point, and then you move on. But rather say something like, oh, as you can see in this graph with the convergence of these two lines at the specific set of coordinates, that's illustrating such and such. So by describing the key details, your entire audience is able to follow along with you. Another bit of do not guidance, try not to use images of text when text could reasonably be used instead. So something I used to see fairly frequently, folks would send out an image of an image of a memo or a document. Assistive technologies aren't going to be able to read that. They're certainly not going to be able to read the text within those images. So instead, send out the memo or the document or copy the text from them and paste that into a communication. Maybe you've got a table that you want to use in a document you're building. Instead of using an image of the table, which at best could just be given alt text, see if you can recreate the table within your document, because then assistive technology users will be able to read the table text, and they're also going to greatly benefit from having the table structure available to them. Our next simple step, use descriptive link text. Now, you might be wondering, what is link text? Maybe that's a new term for you. And if so, let me give you an example. Here we've got a statement. Learn about UC accessibility expectations and requirements through the UC IT accessibility policy. UC IT accessibility policy is underlined. It's in a different color. That right there is link text. It is quite simply text that is hosting a hyperlink. So when we say descriptive link text, what we mean is that link text should provide a clear sense of the link's destination. And I like to even add to that statement that link text should on its own provide a clear sense of the link's destination. That is to say, context clues should not be necessary for you to understand where a link is going to take you. Now, to give you an example of what I mean by that, also our primary example of what not to do, here's another statement. Visit the UCOP Electronic Accessibility website to learn more about accessibility. And it's followed by a link with the link text, click here. Now, a link with the link text, click here, the only way you're going to have a sense of where that link is going to take you is by having the context of the preceding sentence. Similar as if we used learn more as our link text, or we used website as our link text. I'm just going to throw all three of those back up there for you. Website, learn more, click here. All examples of link text you should not use because none of them describe the link's destination. They all rely on you to have the context of surrounding text to have any sense of where those links are going to take you. So what you should do, here's that statement again, visit the UCOP Electronic Accessibility website to learn more about accessibility. But now UCOP Electronic Accessibility is serving as the link text. So the exact guidance, use link text that describes the link's destination. Use something like the destination's webpage or document title. And to really drive this point home, I'm going to take everything away from this slide except for the link text, because there are in fact a few ways that assistive technology users encounter links where all they get is the link text. They don't have the opportunity to benefit from surrounding contextual clues. And in a situation like that, where all you have is click here, website, learn more, and UCOP Electronic Accessibility, clearly only one of those links has link text that gives you any sense of the link's destination, and it's UCOP Electronic Accessibility. So with that, I'm going to hand things off to Eric.
Thank you, Doug. So our next simple step is testing for keyboard accessibility. If you're designing or procuring something interactive, could be online courses, could be online trainings, then you can test for keyboard accessibility. So the purpose of such testing is to ensure that all necessary tasks can be easily completed and all content can be easily accessed using only the keyboard commands. If you can't, then we're going to have some major usability barriers. Testing for keyboard accessibility involves using keyboard commands such as the tab key to move focus forward, shift tab to move focus backward, the enter key to interact with an element that currently has focus, and the arrow keys to navigate certain menus and button sets. You might be wondering, what is focus? Focus is like the keyboard equivalent of your mouse cursor. It indicates what you'll be clicking on when you press your enter key. Focus only lands on interactive elements like links, buttons, form fields, etc. That makes sense when you think about it. Since its purpose is to click things, it should only go to things that can be clicked. And it's indicated by a highlight rectangle surrounding whatever element currently has focus. The highlight color will vary by website or platform, though it should be a high contrast color that's easy to spot. Here's an example of focus indicated on various websites. It's a black rectangle around the working at UC link in that top UCNet screenshot. It's a blue rectangle around the home link in that middle UC Irvine screenshot. And it's a black rectangle around the news tab button in the bottom Google search results screenshot. Now let's go back to those keyboard commands. Let me give you a quick overview of how they work. Let's say I navigated to this UCOP Electronic Accessibility web page. When I press my tab key for the first time, this is where focus will go, to the UCOP logo, which is actually a link, which is why it can receive focus. If I press the tab key again, then I'll go to the next element in the page's order, the jobs link. If I press my enter key, I'm going to essentially click on that link and go to our job site. Instead, I'm going to press tab one more time, and the focus goes to the people link. Tab once more, and the focus goes to the search field, which you can see my blinking cursor in, indicating that I can now type in this field. And to give you a sense of moving focus backwards, if I press my shift and tab keys together, I will move the focus back to that people link. So again, this is something anyone with a keyboard can try on any website or in any computer environment. I highly recommend you give it a try beyond accessibility testing even, and incorporating it into your workflow. Having learned I can use my tab key to do things like navigate an online survey or fill out an electronic form, it's made for a much faster and easier user experience. And the other aspect of testing for keyboard accessibility is that it can serve as an accessibility barometer, because where there are keyboard accessibility issues, it'll point out that there are often other assistive technology issues you're going to find with deeper testing. There can even be occurrences when a person who uses a keyboard cannot move focus away from an interactive element or control using the keyboard alone. These are referred to as keyboard traps. Keyboard accessibility testing is a great example of how learning about accessibility not only helps people with disabilities use your technology, but it also helps the user experience for all users completing their tasks efficiently. We'd also like to share with you the United Kingdom Home Office posters. They contain a ton of foundational level accessibility guidance, all delivered in that easy do-don't framework. The posters come from the UK Home Office, and they can be accessed through either of the links here, or you can just Google search UK Home Office accessibility posters. One of the great things about them is the range of differing abilities they speak to. They have guidance for the ones you probably heard about already: low vision users, screen reader use, deaf and hard of hearing, and maybe physical and motor disabilities, but they also speak to other user groups you may not be readily thinking about, like users with dyslexia, users with autism, and users with anxiety, which is probably a lot of us after the past year. So thank you. This concludes simple steps for improving accessibility. And now I'd like to hand it over to Stephanie to talk about captioning.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Nielsen, and my pronouns are she and her. Welcome and thank you for attending today. Today, I will answer questions about making your video content more accessible in 10 minutes. I will cover what is captioning, when do you caption, and how do you get started with making a video accessible. Today, technology makes it easy for us to create video and audio content that enriches our digital experiences. And captioning is now a life skill needed to make these experiences equitable for everyone. This image of a YouTube video shows a young girl speaking, and the video captions read, "As a deaf person, watching videos without captions can be a really stressful experience." Captioning videos makes video more accessible for the deaf and hard of hearing, but captions also have a curb cut effect. That's when you design for disabilities and you make things better for everyone in the process. Captions help students learn. A national study done in 2016 by Oregon State had over 70% of the student respondents that did not identify with a hearing disability say they used closed captions for the following 7 reasons. 20.7% said, "It helps me focus." 19.9% said, "It helps me retain the information." 19.8% said, "It helps me overcome poor audio quality." 13.5% said, "They watch videos in sound-sensitive environments, like cafes." 8.7% said, "It helps me with difficult vocabulary." And 6% said, "I have difficulty with hearing." And 2.3% said, "English is my second language." Thus, there are many learning benefits to captioning videos. What video or audio files need to be captioned? At UC, videos that are available to the public, used for recurring student courses, job aids for staff, or intended for system-wide and campus-wide audiences need to be captioned.
Stephanie, just 1 second. Do you want to try to get your slides into presenter mode?
Oh, sorry.
No worries.
Is that better?
That's perfect.
Thank you. All right, so where was I? All right, so if you think about captioning videos as part of your planning process, this means you are proactively removing barriers for everyone's benefit. Three things are needed for fully accessible videos. 1, captions which describe the audio elements of the video to help the deaf and hard of hearing. 2, audio descriptions which describe the visual elements of the video to help the blind or those with low vision. 3, a transcript, which allows those that are deaf and blind to use a Braille decoder to access the video. This may seem like a lot, but with some planning, these elements complement each other, and technology today can make it easier to produce accessible videos. Closed captions versus subtitles. So let's take a closer look at these components. This image shows the dialogue options for Lupin, a French TV show on Netflix. Under subtitles, there are options for English or English CC, and CC stand for closed captions. Do you know the difference? The use case for subtitles is to translate dialogue across languages. Closed captions provide more information. Captions describe all the audio content, the dialogue and relevant audio on and off screen. So here's a screenshot of a video that has the redwood trees and the caption that reads, "Slow music builds to upbeat." Music should be described as opposed to just the word music. Captions must be accurate. Captions must identify the speaker, the dialogue, and sounds on and off screen, but they also must be time synchronized and have the correct punctuation with mixed case. This screenshot of a mountain lion in a tree with captions that read, "Chris Wilmers, we've done a lot of work on what you might call the landscape of fear." This shows examples of captions that identify the speaker and the dialogue. So you might be wondering if you should include swear words or fart noises in your captions. And the answer is yes. If words are not censored in speech, they should not be censored in writing. And it's all about equal access. An audio description. An audio description is a verbal description that conveys important visual information. And you can think of this as alt text for videos. Let me play a few seconds of this audio description of The Lion King, and I think this will illustrate what this is.
Hundreds of animals gather at the bottom of Pride Rock, a tall, flat ledge that towers over the rest of the savannah. Zazu, a small blue bird with a large beak, flaps to the ledge. He bows to Mufasa, a powerful, dignified lion with a thick red mane.
So, what are audio description best practices? This image on this slide is again from the Netflix dialogue options. This show offers audio description in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and French. Netflix and Hollywood films, like the one we just watched, The Lion King, hire professional audio describers to write and voice the descriptions of the videos. Audio description is more expensive than captioning, and many common players don't yet support a separate audio track for audio descriptions. So by planning ahead and following a few simple rules, we can ensure that all the visual content is accessible through the audio track. Some examples of this are identifying the speakers or describing a chart. So instead of saying, "As you can see on this chart, fall enrollments of California residents decreased," the speaker could say, "This chart shows that fall enrollments of California residents went from 88% in 2010 to 76% in 2020. So if you're relying on your audience to receive information by reading, your video is not accessible. So make sure you talk the text. So you have some basics and you're probably wondering, how do I get started making my videos accessible? First, step 1, don't rely on automatic speech recognition. If you've ever said, "Hey Siri" or "Hey Alexa," then you've used automatic speech recognition, and many platforms like Zoom's live transcription or YouTube use this technology to produce auto-generated captions. Things could be done to improve auto captioning, but the error rate is still very high. Like someone with accented English says canvas, and Zoom auto captioning writes cannabis. While auto captioning tools continue to make significant progress in accuracy, they are not yet sufficient to meet the accuracy standard without substantial editing. So if you use auto captioning, you need to plan to edit them. Step 2, Select a player or platform and get familiar with what the needs are. For example, many social media platforms like Instagram are trying to provide captions using ASR. In these cases, it is recommended to use open captions, and open captions are burned onto the video and cannot be turned on and off like closed captions. Step 3, plan by writing a transcript that includes both the images you need to describe it and the captions. Think about the goals of your video and what you want people to understand. I usually use a spreadsheet, and I have a column for the images I need to describe and a column for captions. And by starting with the transcript, you're on your way to making accessible media, and having a draft transcript is one of the components for accessible video. Step 4, decide if you will hire a captioning service or will caption the video yourself. Step 5, upload and edit the captions on the platform. And step 6, test your video for accessibility and make sure to leave enough time for testing. When reviewing testing questions for when reviewing captions, you might think about, are they synchronized to the audio track? Do they identify the speaker? Do they describe the music? Do the captions capture the mood and tone of the text? And if not, do you have a transcript available? Test questions for the visual elements. What would a person need to know about that they won't know about just by listening? Are important images described in the audio track? And if not, do you have a transcript? For podcasts or audio-only recordings, is there a text transcript of the spoken audio available on the same page as the podcast or audio file? So in March, the W3C produced a more in-depth video on the topics I just covered. There are many humorous sections in this video, and I highly recommend you check it out to learn more. It's at youtube.com/watch?v = XQOEI_G4UNM. And thank you. That's the end of my demystifying captions. And I'm ending with a picture of my favorite kitty. It's a close-up of a light orange striped cat sitting with its head tilted to the side. The front paws are curled under its chest. Next up is Joshua Meltzer to cover the legal presentation.
All right. My name is Josh Meltzer, and I'm a lawyer with UC Legal in the Office of the President. I'm happy to be here today, and I want to briefly share some legal considerations related to electronic accessibility. We at UC Legal are deeply committed to making the university accessible for people with disabilities, and I personally feel privileged to get to support our clients in this critical work. I'll just add my lawyerly caveat at the outset that this presentation is not intended to provide legal advice for any particular situation, but just to provide some general background information on legal issues related to accessibility. So I'm going to briefly talk through some background on key laws related to online accessibility, some context on how those laws are enforced, both by government agencies and by individuals, and then finally, some themes from regulators on best practices related to compliance. Before I get into those items, I just want to emphasize that UC's commitment to accessibility, both electronic and more broadly, stems from our values. As the university's diversity statement says, the knowledge that the university is open to qualified students from all groups and thus serves all parts of the community equitably helps sustain the social fabric of the state. So compliance with applicable laws and regulations is important, but the driving force behind these efforts is not to avoid lawsuits or government enforcement, although we also want to avoid those, but it's about living our values and making our institution, including our digital environment, accessible and welcoming to people with disabilities. Right, so the primary federal laws in this area are the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And as an aside here, if you haven't seen the film Crip Camp, it presents in very compelling fashion the activism that led to the passage of Section 504 and its implementing regulations, led in significant part by activists from California in the 1970s. There are also state laws, which I won't go through in detail, several of which incorporate the federal requirements from the ADA in Section 504 and then can sometimes impose additional requirements. Now, if you search the text of the statute and regulations of the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 for digital or web accessibility, you'll come up empty. And that's maybe not surprising because the first website did not go online until 1991, 1 year after the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. So as a result, these laws don't provide much specific guidance for online and electronic accessibility, but they do provide some general regulations about accessibility that apply equally in the digital realm. So two of the key requirements from these laws are equal access and opportunity. A public entity must provide qualified individuals with disabilities with an equal opportunity to participate in or benefit from the aid, benefit, or service being provided by the institution here at a university. And then another major requirement is effective communication. A public entity shall take appropriate steps to ensure that communications with applicants, participants, members of the public, and companions with disabilities are as effective as communications with others. Now, there are a number of details and exceptions to these rules, and I won't get into all the details here, but these general requirements have been held to apply to the electronic world. So what does this mean in practice? How do you actually figure out if online content is accessible? One set of resources to help answer that question are the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, known as WCAG. So although these federal statutes don't provide specifics about electronic accessibility, a group of technology and accessibility experts at the World Wide Web Consortium developed a set of private industry standards for website accessibility, known as the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And although these, again, are not formally part of the statutes, many courts have looked to these guidelines in evaluating whether content is accessible under those statutes. And when the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights or the Department of Justice reach settlements with institutions following enforcement actions, as I'll discuss in a minute, they have often defined online accessibility with reference to the WCAG standards. There are a few different versions. UC policy specifies that electronic information must meet WCAG 2.0 at level AA, which is a standard that has commonly been referenced by courts as well as government regulators. So there's not enough time to go through the details about what WCAG requires, but it's all freely available online. But I'll briefly highlight the 4 principles of accessibility covered in WCAG. Those are, is online content perceivable? This means that users must be able to perceive the information being presented, so it can't be invisible to all of their senses. Is it operable? This means users must be able to operate the interface, so it can't require interaction that a user cannot perform. Is it understandable? Means users must be able to understand the information and also the operation of the user interface. And then the last principle is the content robust? This means that it has to be able to be interpreted reliably by a wide variety of users, including with assistive technologies, and needs to be able to adapt as technologies advance. And some of the items in WCAG include many of the things that you've heard about here today, things like color contrast, captions, text alternative for images, and a number of other items as well. So how are these laws enforced? This can be done in a few different ways. First, government regulatory agencies enforce these rules, and that's often prompted by complaints made to those agencies by individuals. At the federal level, the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, known as OCR, is frequently involved with complaints involving website accessibility at colleges and universities. So OCR will open investigations, file complaints, and may reach settlements with universities that require them to adjust their practices and file regular reports with OCR related to compliance. And then the Department of Justice, or DOJ, is another federal agency that enforces these laws and similarly can conduct investigations, file lawsuits, enter into settlements. Then there are also state level regulators that perform analogous roles here in California. And then finally, under the relevant laws, or many of the laws, individuals can also file lawsuits against a university related to electronic accessibility. And in some cases, that can include members of the public who do not attend the university, but are trying to access public material on the website. And there's been a significant uptick in these types of lawsuits in the last few years, and also an increase in regulatory activity. So online accessibility is a growing area of focus, both for enforcement and for litigation. The last thing I want to do is outline some of the themes that we hear from regulators about best practices for website accessibility. And these are items that are often present in settlement agreements that OCR or DOJ reach with institutions. First, and most broadly, is a commitment to ensuring that people with disabilities have equal opportunities to access programs and services. So, this is of course quite general, but regulators really are interested in whether institutions are just going through the motions or whether they have a real commitment that they're putting resources behind. And if regulators do find online content that needs to be remediated, how those regulators can respond may be influenced by their perception of the institution's commitment to accessibility. Another item that regulators look for is policies and procedures related to new or modified online content. So they want to see that organizations have a plan to make sure that new content being added online or existing content that's being modified will be accessible, and that there are procedures in place to make sure that that gets effectively implemented. Regulators also recommend ongoing testing of online content, both through automated online checkers, some of which you heard about today, and then also supplemented by manual testing by knowledgeable individuals. If accessibility issues are identified, then regulators like to see a corrective action plan to prioritize the removal of online barriers. And in many cases, there is not just one way to fix items, so there's room for creativity here, and we certainly see that from all our folks working on these issues. And as is true in the physical built environment, as with curb cuts, for example, changes in the online environment can often improve the experience for everyone, not only for users with disabilities. So it's useful to go in with a mindset about how to make the website more functional and useful for everyone who might access it. Regulators also want to see a process for people with disabilities to request access to any content that may not be accessible to them, so that the university can respond and remediate. And then lastly, appropriate training for those involved in preparing or posting online content. So this is by no means a comprehensive list, but it includes some of the key themes that we hear from regulators and that they have emphasized that they're looking for institutions to be doing. So on behalf of UC Legal, I want to thank everyone for inviting us to participate in this important event. We share a deep commitment to accessibility and inclusion, and our attorneys and staff, both in the Office of the President and on the campuses, look forward to continuing to support all of you in strengthening the university's commitment to accessibility. So I'll now turn things over to Michael Wegman and Judy Tai to discuss issues related to procurement.
Thank you, Joshua. Judy, you're sharing, perfect. All right, our next segment. Thank you, everyone. Our next segment is Think Before You Buy. Don't get stuck with an inaccessible product. I'm Michael Wegman. I'm a Senior IT Commodity Manager in Procurement Services at UCOP.
I'm Judy Tai, Senior Manager of Application Engineering, and I'm in the IT department at UCOP. Michael and I have worked together on quite a few system-wide procurement projects, and today we'll share some of what we've learned over the years to ensure that we're buying accessible products. Michael will start us off with an overview of the UC's accessibility policy, the provision for procurement in the policy, and guidelines in our procurement process. Then I'll talk about how we prioritize accessibility efforts, what we've learned from accessibility testing, and what we check for. And I'll hand it off to Michael to talk about the accessibility policy.
The IT accessibility policy. We do have an IT accessibility policy. It's under the University of California policy IMT-1300, which is the IT accessibility, which was issued in 2013. Summary of this policy is that the university seeks to deploy information technology that has been designed, developed, or procured to be accessible to people with disabilities, including those who use assistive technologies. We'll include a link there, which will also be included in the resources after this, or in the resources list after this webinar. Next slide. Procurement in the IT accessibility policy. What's the requirement? The requirement is that we must have an information technology accessibility program. And the purpose of this IT accessibility program is to establish processes to address IT accessibility in a systematic fashion at each UC location, using local structures and practices as appropriate. The program must include a procedure to incorporate IT accessibility into the procurement process. This includes establishment of a formal means for evaluating the accessibility of products or systems under consideration for procurement. The guidelines to address the accessibility in the procurement process is we have established internal guidelines for system-wide requests for proposals, or RFPs. We should have an accessibility contact, and that contact will include a electronic accessibility committee member and or a subject matter expert in accessibility. Key components of this process is prioritization, evaluation, questions and waiting, and time and making time for testing. Judy will go over some of those things that we go through. And then we also include contract language. So the contract language, Article 60, Joshua touched on some of these. The Article 60 of the UC Terms Conditions, there's a link to that also, which will be included in the resources after this. And then also we include language in the SOW that might include extra things that may be needed by some of the locations, essentially requesting that. And of course, this is an evolving process, making improvements along the way. And Judy can go into some of those challenges or go into a challenge that we've had in the past. Judy?
Thanks, Michael. In one of the first RFPs where we were thinking of accessibility, we had neglected to include accessibility testing into the project timeline, but we did not realize this until the very end. At that point, we could not treat the vendors differently by asking the finalists to provide a testing license when we had not asked the other vendors. So we learned from that experience, and now we ask for a test license when we're drafting the RFP. So the same requirement is made of all vendors who submit a bid. My team is often consulted about the priority that accessibility should have in a project. We don't want the UC to buy an inaccessible application that we then require all employees to use to do their jobs. In an ideal world, my team is brought in at the beginning of an RFP or product selection process. But in the real world, the RFP has concluded, a product has already been selected, and it's launching next week. Can we test it for accessibility really quick? So we created this prioritization guide to facilitate those conversations. The guide consists of 7 questions, including, is the project a new or existing activity? Who is the audience? And what is the implementation timeframe? Based on the input, the guide determines whether accessibility is a high, medium, or low priority in the project. There's a link to the prioritization guide, which will also be sent out with a list of resources. And also on this slide is a screenshot of a sample of the prioritization guide output for a medium or phased priority project. The screenshot reads, new project intended for access by a public or system-wide audience, but unfortunately, no planning was done to address accessibility. This is still a high priority for accessibility given the audience, but realistically, it may be necessary to do a limited fix for accessibility in order to launch and to develop a remediation plan with a deadline for retrofitting. My team is also brought in to perform accessibility testing, which is also an evolving process. In our earlier RFPs, we asked vendors to demonstrate accessibility, and that didn't go so well. They ended up playing videos of computer screens of people using assistive technology. So we decided that it was more informative for us to do our own testing. And there are other areas in the testing process where we can improve, so there's more to do. Now, what do we test for? Well, accessibility testing is pretty involved, but this list highlights some of the top things that we test for. We'll try to navigate with only a keyboard without using a mouse. And sometimes you can't do this without getting stuck on part of a page or part of a computer screen. We'll try to navigate with screen reading software, which is a program that reads aloud the content of a web page or a screen to a person who's blind or has low vision. We'll check for sufficient color contrast between the text color and the background color to help people with colorblind difficulties. And we'll check that images have alternative text to ensure an equivalent experience is provided to people who are blind or have low vision to help them understand what they can't see. We'll check that videos have captions for people who can't hear, whether due to a disability or if they're in a quiet environment like a library. And we'll also check that there are visual cues to help a person identify where the cursor is on the page or screen. So now we've concluded our accessibility testing. What do we do next? Well, if the product is accessible, great. We incorporate additional accessibility needs into the statement of work. But if the product is inaccessible, Michael, what do we do?
What do? We ask the supplier for a roadmap to become more accessible. We try to incorporate that roadmap into the contract, into such as the statement of work, and then we monitor that. We also look at renewals as an opportunity also to incorporate accessibility into the renewal. Something that might have been thought of as accessible at the beginning may not be so accessible today, and therefore we would look into a renewal and add that into the contract prior to doing a renewal. And I'll turn it over to Judy for a conclusion.
So in conclusion, if you remember nothing else from our presentation, think about these 2 bullet points. Talk to your local procurement team about incorporating accessibility into the process, and don't buy technology without testing for accessibility. And with that, we'll hand it off to our next presenter.
Thank you, Judy. Make sure that I'm unmuted. Great. Yvonne, can I get a thumbs up? You can see my slide deck in the right mode?
Yes, I do.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Yvonne, and thank you, Judy. I am Jill Walters from the University of California, San Francisco. I'm in the IT department on the web services team. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm going to speak on how to take advantage of free online courses to reinforce what you've learned today. UC has access to free online courses developed by our accessibility partner, SiteImprove, with an expansive training academy of courses available 24/7. SiteImprove is available at all UC locations, and each campus has a SiteImprove administrator you can contact for support. The links on how to access Site Improve and a list of Site Improve location administrators, which has been mentioned before, will be shared in a resource list distributed to all of today's attendees, along with a recording of this webinar. Our Site Improve Customer Success Manager named Nick Dahlman and UC Berkeley's Lucy Greco, who you heard from earlier today, teamed up to record a University of California Site Improve training video with instructions for onboarding, how to use the tool to monitor your sites for accessibility, and how to use the free online courses. Great news is you don't need to onboard Site Improve to get access to this specific hour-long video. It's a public-facing video, and the link will be provided in the same resource list I just mentioned. I suggest this video as a starting point when you are ready to begin learning about Site Improve as a web accessibility monitoring tool. The free online courses from Site Improve can be accessed one of two ways. Number one, via the Site Improve's Help Center, which is how I'll access the Academy today, so you can see what all is offered there. You must onboard first in Site Improve to follow this route. The second way is to access the courses through the UC Learning Center. Once in Site Improve, you'll notice that not only does Site Improve offer the Academy via its Help Center, but there's a whole lot more. I'm showing a screenshot of the offerings from the Site Improve Help Center that has the following sections: Get Started, Guides and FAQs, What's New, Community, where you can find the accessibility education community. I highly recommend the archive of monthly calls hosted by Keith Bundy, Site Improve's blind digital accessibility consultant and trainer. There's also webinars and the Academy, which is where we find the course library. Every time you complete a course from the Academy, you are awarded a course certificate. Here's a tip. These can be downloaded and noted in the diversity section of your UC performance plan or performance appraisal if desired. The Academy's impressive course library caters to all types of audiences. Most think accessibility responsibility falls on the website owners and web developers, but let's start at the top with leadership. There's a Site Improve course for you. Or are you a digital content creator? Do you make PDFs? Do you need to caption videos like Stephanie talked about? Do you make PowerPoint slide decks? Do you create content with Adobe InDesign? Do you purchase software like Michael and Judy mentioned in the previous section? Do you send emails? Are you a faculty member or an instructional designer? Site Improve has all these types of courses for you. Let's begin our tour. I'm going to end my slideshow and share with you my browser window. There we go. I'm in Site Improve and I'm going to follow a link to the Help Center and Academy and take you on a tour. We're waiting for the Academy to open. And I am switching to learner view. And there's a keyframe or a video that is playing on my screen right now, prompting me to watch this video. I won't play it today, but I highly recommend you watch this video on your own time. It's less than 3 minutes long. I'll close the video window. And here in the sidebar, there's a news section. And I'll read the text of the latest news item. The most common question we hear is, what do I need to put in alt text for this image? This is an easy skill to learn and one that everyone online should know how to do. Our solution, our latest Site Improve Academy course title is Fundamentals of Alt Text, and that was released earlier this week in celebration of Global Accessibility Awareness Days. Let's click on the course link in that news item. And you can see there is what it looks like every time you open up a new course. The description of this course reads, the most common question we hear is, what do I need to put in alt text for this image? So it's an easy skill to learn and one that everyone should know how to do. It also gives an estimated time duration of this course of 30 minutes. I'm also going to click on the additional resources link. And for every course, there is usually a sheet about served up in PDF or Word doc format. And I'm going to open the PDF version, which downloaded to my screen. And this is a great way to get to know what is going to be presented in the course. For example, for fundamentals of alt text, they go into what is it, what does it do, why do I need to consider it, examples, how to add alt text, and some important things. Your images might be described as decorative, informative, functional, or logos, and this course will tell you how to address each type of image. Ready to see your learning options? I am going to navigate to the content library. And here you can see all of the available courses. You can filter by content type in the left navigation. You can look at just courses, or you can filter by learning paths. A learning path is a bundle of multiple courses. Let's look at the learning path for accessibility for Microsoft Office. I'm clicking on the tile that shows up, and we can discover more about this path. This page for this path shows the different modules. So there is a portion about Outlook, PowerPoint, Word, and Excel. Let's return to the content library and do a keyword search for some of the various audiences and topics mentioned earlier today. In the search field, I'm going to type the word purchasing, and I have two results that displayed. The first is a learning path titled Accessibility for Leadership. And it's a bundle of 6 courses, as mentioned in the top right corner of the tile. And this path will take about 6.5 hours to complete. And then one of the courses in this path is Accessibility for Purchasing, with an estimated time of about an hour. We also heard Stephanie talk about captioning. I'll type in the keyword caption. And we bring up a accessibility for multimedia course. This one takes about an hour. And so if you're a faculty member or an instructional designer teaching online, you might also want to check out some things. I'm going to type in the keyword virtual. And we have a path for accessibility for educators, 10 courses expected to take over 8.5 hours. Or one of the courses in that bundle is accessibility for the virtual classroom. Let's do another keyword search for Outlook, because we all send email, right? I'll click on the tile for Outlook. And I want to mention each course has a 5-star rating for the reviews of this site. We see all 5 stars are highlighted. So this course has gotten a lot of great reviews. And if you want to take a deeper dive into reviews, I'm moving down a little bit to navigate to the reviews section. And you can see people have consistently rated this one with 5 stars. One person wrote, "It's a useful course. It was concise and provided a good summary of key things to think about." Another comment is, you would never think how important accessibility is in email. It's very important to adapt the text to an audience for success of sharing the main message. As you start taking these courses, you saw some of them, some of those paths might take more than a full day of work, with 8.5 hours estimated. You can always take a break anytime. Your progress is saved as you go. Simply close the browser and return at your convenience to the Academy's homepage and see your courses in progress and pick up where you left off. As a reminder, all the links I mentioned and visited today will be shared via a resource list, so you can begin your journey with SiteImprove and its course library. Taking advantage of SiteImprove's online courses that are free is something you can do to make the digital world more accessible and inclusive to everyone. Thanks for joining me on this quick tour of the Academy, and I will turn it back over to Yvonne.
Well, thank you to all the presenters. I hope everyone enjoyed these sessions. I just want to make a few comments in closing, go over a few things that you can keep in mind to do for accessibility. And number one is think about accessibility. Remember it. Remember to learn and think about what you can do. That's just step number one. Number two, take some of that training that Jill just walked you through. It's free. It's available to anyone at UC. Short classes, really helpful. Get the training. Three, start practicing and making your documents and your videos accessible. You don't have to be perfect. Just start practicing. Number four, if you're going to buy something, ask about accessibility before you pay money. And number five, follow up to this webinar. We're going to be sending you, as we've said incessantly, I think, a resources list with lots of links and information from this webinar. It'll have an evaluation survey link, but I hope that Jim is putting that also in chat right now, and you can fill that evaluation out so we know what works and what's useful for you, and we can do this again in the future. Eventually, we'll also be sending you the recording as we, after we've gotten it captioned and we've gotten it posted. But so look for our email, and we'll also be following up in the UC IT blog with an article, and you can get to that at cio.ucop.edu. Then I want to just leave you all with a quote from Hugh Hare. He is a professor at MIT, and he runs a lab that creates bionic limbs. He has said, humans are not disabled. Our built environment, our technologies are broken and disabled. In other words, we have the choice and we can change that environment, fix those technologies. And we hope that all of you have gotten just a few ideas today in how you can be part of doing just that. Thank you for joining the webinar, and that concludes our sessions. Thank you.